The following is a list of what I would call stuck people, and comes all of a sudden to me in one fell swoop here. This laundry list I'm going to give, based, really on a lifetime of comparing and contrasting people. I sat for decades in coffee shops, for instance, but only a certain type of coffee shop. Only when I traveled a lot more in a diverse number of settings did I discover what I'm going to list right now. And I believe it's critical that one have a variety of experiences to compare and contrast people so that you can see who's stuck, basically, and who's not. Relatively speaking, there's degrees, of course. So here goes, in no particular ultimate order, just a laundry list here I jotted down earlier today. First, I would say stuck people are observed to be so by way of their not having changes really in their life. Everything is just same old, day by day, month by month, year by year, decade by decade, quarter century by quarter century, until such time they have a heart attack, cancer, or stroke. Maybe if they're lucky. I know, for instance, my family physician and Jack Canfield once were on TV together, and they said that, for instance, my physician is a cancer specialist, and he says a real wake-up call for many people in their lives is when they get cancer. I would say maybe because some people never have any changes of significance in their lives and somehow muddle through. Until cancer, then that's like lighting a fire under somebody to change suddenly, totally reevaluate things. Even say if they get cancer, only live a few more years or a year. That might be the best year of their life because they finally start to re-examine their premises and their comfort zone based same old life. So here goes to the laundry list. First, they tend to have the same job. Sometimes at the same chair for decades. I know one man, for instance, who was in the Navy, but he sat at a desk with a computer terminal, and after he finished 20 or 25 years in the Navy and retired, the next day, as a civilian, he occupied the same chair. But, just different paperwork enacted to hold that down. And then he had a double income. But the chair was the same chair, and the job was the same job exactly. But secondly, the same tasks in the job, of course, I'm kind of alluding to, too. Also, the same locale that they're in. I know some people who have lived in the same house 30, 40, 50 years, or the same town, basically. Sometimes I know one man who has 6 generations going in the same town, and he is not living that way in poverty, abject poverty, that is. Let's see, next on the list. The same friends and the same few friends. And I would add, these friends tend to be their spouse, if any, or their parents, or their cousins, or the wife of a cousin. In other words, kind of a clique there amongst people. Some might say it's called codependency. I don't particularly care for a word like that, but nothing outside of the family environment, basically. And I mean for decades or a whole lifetime. And it doesn't strike these people at all that this is unusual compared to some other people because they haven't done any comparing and contrasting, basically. Or if they have, they haven't thought about it much. Or their comparing and contrasting is based on 1 or 2 weeks a year of vacation. And it's a very canned vacation, very predictable and planned out beforehand, at least unconsciously in their mind. Now, some people, too, love to take the same vacation, year in, year out. For instance, I went camping once last year in Appalachia and went to a site in the Red River Gorge where you're allowed to park your cars and people have their RVs next to each other. And this one man I met of some intellectual acumen has come to the same campsite year after year, at least 15 summers. I've been to another campsite, an RV site, near my place where I live these days, and people are packed in like sardines, and they bring their TV sets of a sort, have their beer kegs, so to speak, nothing wrong with that, their music, the same music they listen to at home. They have electrical hookups, heating, air conditioning provided by their RVs. And you have to wonder what's different, just other than the bathroom facilities, basically, and each room very micro-sized. So again, very little change. Now, some also have a variation on this. They go to a coffee shop wanting change, but they bring their laptop or their work with them in general, or their earbuds and favorite music, or even watch their favorite YouTube videos, etc. That's kind of only a semi-change also. Another example, when I was younger, in my 20s, I used to go to the same few places every weekend. In fact, sadly, when I was in Germany for a while, my favorite recreational activity every Saturday was to spend part of it doing laundry. Instead of traveling. I only traveled like once every month or so on a weekend or every couple months. So that was very interesting to have that opportunity and yet to be so constricted. Again, same old, same old. And when I lived in California for a while, I had a very set routine too. The 9-to-5 job, I mean precisely for an insurance company, and then go home and, on the weekends, the same few places I'd go to, over and over and over and over again. You know, some people probably got sick of seeing me there in the same shops over and over. And a routine for me was to go to a movie on Friday night, and then a favorite coffee shop, have the same sweet bun and coffee. That was about what I could afford. And but the same sweet bun and the same coffee in the same coffee shop. Or maybe rotating amongst 2 or 3 coffee shops. And that went on for like 3 years. Here's another example. I have a relative who loves to travel, but he travels to the same country, the same city. I think perhaps has rented an apartment or owns one there for quite a while, has a car there that he keeps there when he's back in the United States, and he's there half a year. But he's done this trip at least 50 or 60 times. And really travels nowhere else. No other countries. It's just this one country and one city. And probably the same coffee shop or two, too. And bringing the same routine materials to the coffee shop, like a favorite book. A very canned experience. Now, in terms of TV viewing, say, some have the same sitcom they love to watch, or the same comedian, or the same show weekly, basically. Or they may have their favorite movie that they watch over and over and over again, mastering every nuance unconsciously. until they can mouth the words before the actor or actress says them. Very predictable. And isn't that then what I'm describing so far in general? I think it is. Utter predictability. In fact, it strikes me I'm not the only one who has made a hobby of doing their laundry on their free time when they're working 40 to 80 hours on the weekday. In a very canned job, by the way, in cubicles. Some people want so little change in their lives that they may live, say, in a big urban area surrounded by mountains, water, a variety of cultural activities available. If they want all that type of fast pace of life and costs involved, and yet they may have only the same few restaurants they go to or same recreational spots over and over again. And, this can be going on even in their 50s or 60s. And they have the same one or two places they go to as per bird watching places or hiking places, nature sanctuaries in general, as opposed to trying out a variety, or basically a variety of ways of meeting people and experiencing nature in general, or being alone even. Some people, too, want such predictability, I think, that their favorite their favorite friend is their pets. And, while I can see greatly the value of pets in people's lives, I think pets are a lot more predictable and often accepting than people are. People are quite unpredictable and varied, especially if you were to try to make that a point in your life to see variety of people. So what better way to nix out variety than to have a pet and focus only on pets? Ironically, then, saying, isn't a dog man's best friend? For some people, anyway, who don't want variety or non-predictability. Then, too, what about the so-called corporate job? Now, I'm not going to say too much about corporate jobs. I've had some of them, but I think they're very predictable, especially if you have sunk a lot of money, time, and your youthhood into what they call training before you hit the street in a certain quote-unquote career. And then you may be kind of trapped in that career with various nuances. Isn't that a lot of predictable activity then? Maybe some people leave that and become consultants in their field. Some people even switch fields completely, and maybe even from a data or such job, office job, to people job, after they transition in their personal lives somehow, perhaps. Now, sadly, I do think that this issue of sunk costs, including the cost in time and your energies and your youthhood again, does contribute greatly to what they call not much change, basically. One tries to throw good money after bad, perhaps, sometimes, to justify that kind of huge investment. I have a friend, for instance, who runs a gas station, and his daughter just got out of medical school a couple of years ago. And she incurred $100,000 a year in loans somewhere along the line. So she has huge sunk costs here, you might say, not to mention her time involved and energy and pains incurred, too, from any stresses overall, including the people she's had to interact with along the way, some of them anyway. So I suppose she would find this a huge set of sunk costs and find herself rather constricted. Now, another type of constrictedness, I think, would be talking about, shall we say, relations in the bedroom department. Some get married, and within 3 months, say, that has come to an end. And that can go on perhaps for decades or the rest of their lives till the death do them part. I think that's a form of stuckness too. And in this case, perhaps it has to do sometimes with issues of one partner having some traits not agreeable to the other partner or viewpoints about such matters. I'm not going to go into this much, but that can be a real issue there, being stuck. Another issue of being stuck is, say, if one's in a relationship and one partner is what they call depressed, bummed out, whatever you call it. And this goes on for decades and decades and decades without remitting or changing. I think the one partner generally not wanting to get out of their comfort zone, basically to try anything new to force change that would knock them upside the head and cause them to think about anything that is out of the routine thought processes. And the other partner just lets this happen somehow. I don't know, maybe there's what they talk issues of codependency, but I've seen marriages where this happens and nothing changes for decades. I don't know how they can go on. Now, there are some people who would say even a fixed relationship by legal arrangement can get quite boring after a while. Unless maybe my thinking is you're so unobservant or you're so discombobulated that you don't know what's going on around you, to include with your spouse, and so every day is a new day, and then you never get bored, do you? It's kind of like that movie, what is it, The Groundhog, where you wake up and every day you can't remember what you lived through the last day, so you're not bored. That would include some relationships, I believe. Whereas some others might say after a while they're so bored they've got to have a change. Or they might even say, I need an open relationship. Then there are those who have a fixed bedtime and a fixed awaking time, regardless of the days in which or nights in which they have a certain inspired thought that they might want otherwise to carry through. This fixed relationship with their time, sleeping arrangements might even be facilitated with sleeping drugs, sleeping pills, whatever, or a little hot toddy before bed at a certain fixed time, regularity and all. They might say, for instance, too, that's the optimal way to get ahead in life by planning, including your bedtime and awakening time, or that this is best for your health. But there are those who have lived to a ripe old age and been extraordinarily productive, including Mr. Edison, who had more than 1,000 patents to his name by the time he died, and died at a ripe old age, who just got a few hours sleep a night. And there are Buddhists, too, who get little sleep, up at 2 a.m., by the way, each morning sometimes. And then they drink a lot of green tea, some of them, to effect keeping up alert. But at any rate, I think this may be a fallacy, that you need a regular bedtime, a regular awakening time, and a proverbial 8 hours of sleep. No more, no less. Along with that proverbial phrase, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Now, there are those, too, who carry out the national average of TV watching of some 5 hours a day. I have to scratch my head about that phenomenon, how that is even facilitated, and nobody is commenting much about it. I call it being a TV-holic, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Now, there are some talking about the bedroom relations department again who have never experienced what I'm talking about to the day they die. I think it's more than just a few in number. It might be like as many as 15% in our country. I suppose the minute one would want to be doing such activities, it's rather unpredictable what's going to happen physically and emotionally. And so the person who wants no change in their lives might find themselves doing nothing in this department. let alone also dating, getting married even, or if they do marry, consummating the marriage. And as per meeting people, once again, sticking only to family members, very predictable, and never going even to a single coffee shop their entire lives unless it's a business matter and they have to meet somewhere, like some real estate agents or whatever. And then once again, it's a very canned and dry experience. They're either talking on their phone, have their laptop, or scrawling on a pad of paper, making calls, but they're not chit-chatting with people that they've never met before, let alone a variety of types of coffee shops. Some of them say the coffee shop king coffee shops, some of them the old-timer coffee shops, some in small towns, some in Urbania, some in downtown places next to the art theaters, some of them with featuring same-sex relationships or heterosexual relationships, on and on and on. Some with poor people, some with wealthy people. But at any rate, I think you get my drift here. Some only in bookshops, some not, etc., etc. Now, when I think in general of someone not wanting to meet people, not being curious about them, I see this as a form of not wanting unpredictability. And in what way? Not just unpredictability about learning about other people, but learning about themselves. Because the minute we interact with people, we're going to find some of them rejecting us. Not just basically not wanting to call us up again or talk much with us, but giving us verbal and nonverbal communications that tell us things we didn't hear before or hope we wouldn't hear or don't want to hear. And so this is a form of unpredictability coming in our lives once again. Now, some people, too, might want to have a whole lot of children in their family, and then they're really so preoccupied working to provide for the children, one after another, or they're birthing one after another, that, too, preoccupying one's life for a long span of time, such that this in itself guarantees predictability. One doesn't have anything to do other than work or raise the children or otherwise find it same-o. One family, for instance, having had 18 children by birth, not adoption. Now, it might be said, too, sadly, some of these children, if had one after another, could be a form of slave labor for farm work, for instance. Or maybe this, in their mind, is a sense of pride for them. Now, there are those who don't go out much, and they say they're shy. My mind, just now popping into my mind are a couple things here. Maybe a predominant feature here is either their fear of violence or issues of hearing something they don't want to hear about themselves that's true or false. Maybe they don't want to hear about a trait of theirs that they deny having, because if they had it and it were very hard to fix, if ever, they might feel very, very distraught and not want to call that a handicap, perhaps, and learn to live with it. They'd rather fantasy that they don't have that impediment than to find out they have it. And so live a fantasy life all in a cubicle, basically, in their own home, if nothing else. And they call that then shyness, but I think that's what we're talking about sometimes, is a fear either of violence, once again, or hearing something about a trait we have that is hard to fix, typically, at least in established channels, shall we say. Then there are those who are what you might call shy because of, for lack of a better word, sexual issues. Either a religious outlook that prohibits feeling sexual nature in us, or forbids it under so many constraints that only in a very limited sphere can they practice anything at all or feel anything at all. And And so when they get out of this little bubble of a viewpoint, they feel very anxious, especially if someone looks at them in a way that strikes certain feelings in them that isn't called inappropriate in their mind or their faith's mind. And so what do? They isolate and say they're shy. Some too might say they're shy because they're chronically angry, and in public then they get a lot of rejection. And this is such a counter feedback loop that they just say, well, what's the point? And they don't go out anymore at all and try to work on that chronic anger, so they just say they're shy. This too might apply in general to feeling a malaise in life or being bummed out. I think those two words kind of summarize for me what the clinical term is, depression. But when it goes on and year after year, it seems to me that there's a real issue here. Something is not being addressed. A certain truth, a certain deception we tell ourselves is not being addressed. And if you just sit in your room or sit in your cubicle, your certain job over and over the years, nothing is going to light a fire under your behind to take a look at things and ask, what am I assuming here or believing that is false and is perpetuating everything. And once again, unless you have a heart attack, cancer, or a stroke, or get shot, or run over by a bus almost, I think things can perpetuate, sadly, especially if one is taking chemical substances, anything, legal or illegal, to dull your mind and never really examine things, and you're never really feeling enough anger or pain to do anything in general. Nothing is lighting a big fire under your behind, so to speak, only a little matchstick from 10 feet under, which isn't going to do much but raise the temperature under you a millionth of a degree. That's not going to work. Now, I know there are those who have been stigmatized in various ways and feel that they can only get jobs in what I would call a same-old job, or a drone job, or a quote-unquote assembly line job. Even if you have a PhD or MD degree sometimes, or a master's degree, you can still have a conveyor belt job, so to speak. But at any rate, sadly, I think this can go on year after year and decade after decade. Reminds me rather of a gerbil or a rat on a wheel going round and round, and they call that the rat race, maybe. I'm trying to remember now the name of a book. Might have been by a Mr. Givens. If it ain't broke, break it. Something of that accord. Maybe if we want to change, but we don't know how, we don't even know where to start, and nobody can advise us very appropriately, and we're a bit of a fuss budget wanting to change only in the optimal manner, then I wonder if the best way of breaking free of this, including if they're calling us so-called depressed or whatever, any kind of fixation, I wonder if the best thing to do is just to do anything. I mean, anything crazy even, like just flat out quit your job, or just flat out jump in a lake almost. Anything even wacky to get a result other than what you're getting already. Someone said, for instance, or refined the phrase, insanity is when you do the same thing over and over again, expect different results. I suppose because doing the same thing will not promote different changes in feeling. Everything's going to be so predictable. Now, I'm going to put in something that may be a little controversial to some or a little upsetting to some, but I think some of this is perpetuated by the very influences that might like to help, such as psych drugs that go on for use year after year and decade after decade. The problem in my mind being that people taking these drugs are semi-numb, if not more. And then they don't have enough emotional experience of anger or fear to generate a desire to change anything. It's kind of like being asleep, so to speak, all the time, and maybe having a nightmare every once in a while. There just isn't enough reason to change because you're not feeling enough pain. You're too much in the comfort zone, or you're too comfortable. You're not real comfortable, but you're not in severe pain such that you cry out and say, I've got to do something here. This is completely nuts. And so these prescription drugs that ostensibly are wanting to help us with depression or anger or anxiety, or even sometimes violence or outbursts, seem to me sometimes to be inimical in the long run because they so suppress brain function, especially if piled up one drug after a drug after drug, that we don't feel enough then to want to do anything more than same old, same old. Hence the so-called treatment being worse than the cure, because there is no cure being effective, not on a long-term basis. Hence, there are some interesting books, I think, that I will just toss out for consideration. Comfortably Numb, and This Is Your Country High on Drugs, and third, Drugging the Poor. That might be enough to chomp on for a while. Indeed, I'm going to reiterate this at the risk of repetition or upsetting anybody, but if we want change, we're going to have to feel a sufficient reason to want change. But if we're comfortably numb by some kind of substances, and I mean prescription drugs, ostensibly to help overcome or cope with certain things, being a way of being comfortably numb too, I think that's a bit of an issue. If you're too comfortably numb, why would you want to change? You wouldn't want to change. And so when people say get out of your comfort zone, maybe that means trimming these drugs used so that you're going to feel more pain. And start to examine your thinking, your premises, and your living situation, and even the people you spend time with, or even your religion, or where you go to church, or whatever, or whether you like living urbania versus country. Something is going to have to flip here. But if you don't feel discomfort enough, it's just not going to happen, I don't think. Not when so-called therapy these days doesn't seem to affect much of anything. Unless you see a certain specific person, shall we say, who really is doing what you would like to do, basically. Someone you really admire. Not a therapist who just shows up to their office day after day at 9 a.m., goes home at 5, eats dinner, watches favorite TV show, same old for the next 40 years. To me, that's not a therapist to emulate. In fact, I think the best therapist to see is someone who has quit the whole profession and calls themselves a recovering therapist then, even at the PhD level, like Dr. Ann Schaaf, who wrote When Society Becomes an Addict, and has delved into some other issues too, including women's issues. How interesting, she called herself a recovering addict, or rather recovering therapist or psychotherapist. And wouldn't you know, she was a Cherokee Indian and lived in Oklahoma for some time. Maybe she traveled, but she also spent time in Washington, D.C., but she was a Cherokee Indian. So I'll just throw that out there for consideration. Now, this recording is being done while I'm driving down the road, which is a change for me. I always used to think, I have to have a expensive microphone being used and under quiet conditions, and maybe I have to have a certain favorite time of day to do it, and same old, so many criteria. My life has greatly evolved. I was extremely contained in my earlier years, especially. So I hope you can get the drift that I'm talking from personal experience, too. of this I'm talking about was part of my life for many years. My last piece of advice then, or comment, would be, this might be even the title of a book. I'm just going to say it, put it out there. Get a life. You know, is it much of a life if we do things so routinely and feel so little one way or the other that we're basically asleep most of the time, in the Buddhist sense anyway. That's about all I have to say. That we need to think of the term get a life. Do we have a life? I wish you well.